Hello, everyone. My name is Priya. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we'll be breaking down the latest draft guidance from Health Canada on how to interpret significant change for medical devices. For those of you who may not be familiar with what RegDesk does and who we are, we have a holistic RIM platform, regulatory information management system, with built-in regulatory intelligence. Our platform uses AI to allow regulatory teams to prepare, manage, and publish global technical files fairly quickly, usually within hours. You can obtain daily updates on regulatory changes, collaborate with your distributors, track registrations, manage standards, perform impact assessment, and a whole gamut of workflows are embedded within the platform. If you'd like to learn more or have any specific questions about RegDesk specifically, we'd be happy to schedule a call to discuss further. We also have an upcoming webinar where because we've been receiving a lot of demand from our webinar in January, to understand how RegDesk leverages AI. So we'll host a separate meeting to show you how we are using AI within our platform. That being said, before we begin our discussion this morning, I'd like to turn our attention to our attendees. Thank you again for joining us. At the end of this meeting, we'll try our best to hold a brief Q&A. We have some great content today, and we want to make sure that we cover that, but we do encourage your participation. There's a chat button on your screen. In the interest of time, please submit your questions throughout the course of our conversation and talk, and we'll try our best to address some questions if we can, but if we run out of time, you can email us your questions and we'll try to address them via email. And also, we'd love to get your feedback on today's webinar and any ideas you may have for future webinar topics. And I'd like to now introduce my colleague, Apurva Kushare, here today to brief you on this guidance. And please note that there's a lot of content here. You do not have to take notes. We will email you the PowerPoint presentation that Apurva is sharing with you. And thank you, Apurva. I'll let you take over.
Yeah, thank you, Priya, for the brief introduction. I'm really delighted to be a part of the webinar, and thank you all for joining. So I'll just take a minute to share my screen and we can get started. Yeah, I hope you all can see my presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So today we are going to talk about the new draft guidance document published by the Health Canada Agency on how to determine significant changes of medical devices. Whether you are here out of curiosity or seeking knowledge or aiming to expand your expertise, I assure you that our time together will be informative. And since this topic is very interesting and complex at the same time, I will try my best to share various examples and also address some key takeaways towards the end of our presentation. So before we get started, so here are some topics that we will be going over in the next 30 minutes. I have divided the presentation into 3 segments. In the first segment, I will be providing an overview. Then we will also understand the definition of significant changes and also some important general principles and understand the difference between significant change and a non-significant change. In the second part, we will understand the 3 major parameters, that is risk assessment, existing datasets, and verification validation, which can help you determine whether a change is significant and also discuss different types of change categories along with the examples. Lastly, I will also share the relevant forms you can use to submit the changes to the agency and the key takeaways from this webinar. So let's get started with an overview. So this guidance document, it replaces the guidance for interpretation of significant change of the medical devices from 2011. So this guidance document was revised on February 7th, 2024. The purpose of the draft guidance is to expand on the definition of significant change. The guidance document also outlines some crucial elements of what constitutes a significant change, and it can also help manufacturers decide when to obtain an amendment to their authorization before making the modified devices available in Canada. I want to make an important point here. This is not the final guidance document. It is subject to revision. And also, in addition, the medical device stakeholders and some of the industry experts, including the manufacturers of class 3 and 4 devices, have the opportunity to share your views and comments on the guidance document. So the deadline to submit your views is April of 2024. You can share your responses using the email ID that I have attached in this slide. So feel free to participate in the discussion and make sure that you submit all your responses before the deadline. So moving on to our next slide. So here are some important considerations before carrying out the change assessment. Like if the proposed change to a class 3 or 4 medical devices is significant change, you must apply to the Health Canada to amend your authorization. You can only sell your all the modified medical devices or components in Canada once you receive this amended medical device authorization from Health Canada. So this is a very important consideration. An amendment is also required for medical devices that are modified due to any corrective actions or recalls if those changes are considered significant. So on the other hand, for the changes that are not significant, you may submit a minor license amendment form. So I have attached this form towards the end of our presentation. So before we jump onto our next slide and the details that we will be talking about, it is first important to understand the definition of significant changes. Um, yeah, here is the definition. So a significant change is a change that could reasonably be expected to affect the safety or effectiveness of the medical devices. So this includes any changes to the manufacturing process, facility, or equipment. It can be manufacturing quality control procedures, which include the methods, tests, and procedures used to control the quality, purity, and sterility of the device or of the materials used in its manufacturing. Then the design of the device, which is very important, including its performance characteristics, principles of operation, specifications of materials, energy source, software, or accessories. Also, any changes to the intended use of the device, including any new or extended use, any addition or deletion of a contraindication for a device, and any change to the period used in the establish its expiry date. So moving on to the next slide, the guidance document has listed down the general principles the manufacturers should consider before performing the change assessment. Significant change is basically a change that could impact, as we all know, safety and effectiveness of class 3 and 4 devices. This also applies to the changes to the compatible class 2 devices that may affect the safety and effectiveness of the high risk class 3 or 4 devices with which it interacts. So in order to determine whether a change is significant, these are some considerations that are very important for manufacturers in order to make their assessment. So it is important to consider the impact of the change that may have on the patient, practitioner, or users and on the specifications of the device. Determine whether the change could reasonably be expected to affect the safety, quality, or effectiveness of the device in either positive or a negative way. It is very important to consider the results of the risk assessment. So we will be going in details about these three parameters in our next segment. It is important to consider whether the data supporting the modified device can be interpolated from the existing data sets. And it is also important to consider the results of verification and validation testing. So in a scenario where there are several, like multiple changes to a device, it is important to assess each change separately and as well as understand the collective impact of the change. Uh, Now let's understand what is the difference between a significant change and a non-significant change. So a significant change is basically that affects the device's safety or effectiveness. And these changes are also made in response to known changes in the safety and effectiveness. So here are some examples, such as if you have a new previously unidentified hazard or hazardous situation can lead to a significant change, or a change in the likelihood of the hazard occurring is also considered to be a significant change. On the other hand, a non-significant change would basically be any new or modified risks which are negligible. And also the probability of introducing unintended consequences is also negligible. So an example of a non-significant change would be the device performs the same as the original design submitted in the previous application. So this situation, you're basically not making any major changes. So hence, this would be considered as a non-significant change. So as we move on to the next slide, we will go through the three major parameters that can help manufacturers identify significant and non-significant changes. So a risk assessment should be incorporated through the process of assessing the significance of a change, and also as a final step. So manufacturers must ensure that their risk assessment is addressing the following elements. So this slide I feel is very, very important to consider. So a risk assessment should be able to identify any hazards or hazardous situations that can lead to harm to the patients or the operators. It should also be able to estimate the probability and severity of the harm, and also determine the acceptability of the residual risks, taking into consideration the risk control measures that have been incorporated into the device design. And also, it should be able to evaluate the probability and impact of the unintended consequences. Your risk assessment should also identify and analyze any new risks as well as any shifts in the existing risks. So, this is one of the important tools that the manufacturers can really use in order to make a determination whether your change is significant or not. The next parameter would be interpolation from the existing data sets. So interpolation from the existing data sets may be used to determine whether the change is significant or not. So here I would like to share an example. So a change may be determined to be non-significant when the test reports for the authorized device previously submitted to and reviewed by the Health Canada can be used to show the changes in the device that is safe and effective. So in this situation, you're basically using an existing data set in order to show that the changes that you're making to your device is safe and effective. Another example of that would be, let's say, a changed device design is still fully within the scope of the existing data sets and there are no deviations. And one more example I would like to give here is, let's say, for example, the existing test reports for an authorized device can be used as an evidence of the changed device performances and show the change has no impact on the device risks. So you can basically utilize the existing test reports in order to show that there is no significant impact on on the device changes that you will be making. So on the other hand, we also have some examples uh, where the changes could be significant. Uh, so in this case, where the existing data sets do not adequately reflect the changed device, then the change is likely significant. So another example would be in the situation where the performance changes are unpredictable based on the existing data sets and are very sensitive to even the small design changes. So such type of changes can be considered as a significant change. So moving on to the next slide, we have the third parameter, that is uh, verification and validation. So we can make use of these two parameters in order to test whether our device can be significant or not significant. So before that, let's first understand what is the difference between verification and validation testing. So verification testing basically ensures that a device performs as intended. So an example of a significant change here would be in case if the verification testing produces any unexpected results or is different than that conducted in the previous application. On the other hand, the validation testing demonstrates that the clinical performance of a device is acceptable. So the need for validation testing usually indicates that the change made to the device is significant. So this is like a key indicator which can help you in determining that the device changes are significant. So before we move on to the next segment, I would like to recap on the key points that we have covered so far. So we have gone through the definition of significant changes, and we also have an understanding of the general principles, which I feel is one of the highlighting aspects of this guidance document, and that every manufacturers must go through the general principles stated. And also we have discussed the three parameters that can help you in determining whether a change is significant or not. So in the second segment, we will be going through the types of changes along with some common examples for significant and non-significant changes for better understanding. So this may or may not apply to you in every situation, but here are some common examples that the agency has stated and which can help you in making your change assessment. So moving on to the next slide, we have the first type of change, that is change to the manufacturing processes, facilities, or equipments. So a manufacturing change impacts how a device is made, but it does not intentionally change the device or its packaging and labeling material. So here are some examples of manufacturing change, such as changes to the component formation process. It can be altering manufacturing machine tolerance. It can also be replacing equipment used to perform a manufacturing function. And it can also be like moving manufacturing to a new facility. Uh, so these are some of the changes that are considered to be significant. And on the contrary, we also have some examples for non-significant changes, which can be like changes to the manufacturing process, facility, or equipment that do not impact the device specification, performance, or any materials used. And also the addition of new manufacturing facility in case where the manufacturer's name and address on the device labeling remains the same, or the new facility has some same manufacturing process and equipment of the same specification. And another example of a non-significant change would be the new facility is not a new sterilization facility. So these are some examples of a non-significant change. So the next type of change we have is change to the manufacturing quality control procedures. So an example of a significant change would be if if a change to the quality control inspections or tests used to control the quality, purity, or sterility of materials and devices that affect the specification of the finished device. So this is very important to consider. It's of the finished device or its components, including its packaging, are often considered to be significant changes. And another example I would like to state here for a significant change would be if you plan to remove or modify these activities where the results in that specifications or any criterias are basically loosened, or if you plan to increase the acceptance quality levels, this can also lead to a significant change. So, and also on the other hand, uh, changing or adding new tests or inspection activities for incoming materials, in process materials, and final products, it's considered to be non-significant change. If you plan not to loosen any criterias, or especially if you plan not to increase these acceptance quality levels, then it's obviously it's going to be a non-significant change. The next, the most important and complex part is the change in design. So change in design, it can range from any minor design specifications or any engineering changes to any major changes in operating principles. So significant changes can include modifications to either any control mechanism, it can be devices operating principles, it can also be devices design specifications, or any components or accessories. So these are some examples where these are some examples of the design changes. Um, Moving on to the next slide. So this is one of the important considerations when it comes to changes in design. So a change to design specification may be significant if it influences one of the following factors. So the first factor can be the indications for use or intended use. So an example of a significant change here would be, like, for example, changing the length or diameter of a cardiovascular stent. So it can be placed in like different arteries, and this may introduce an additional indications for use. So you are basically making a design change where, and also the placement of this stent is changing. So this is considered to be a, a major indications for use change. The next factor would be the requirements to have the clinical data. So changes to the design specifications that require new clinical data to validate safety or effectiveness of the device is generally considered to be significant. Um, another example here of a significant change would be like making a device smaller so that the pediatric indications can be added, which obviously requires an additional clinical evidence. So these changes can be considered as a significant change. Or another example would be introducing a change that results in any new indications or clinical use, or introducing a new feature whose use is not well established. For that type of device, it requires a new clinical validation. So these are some examples to help you understand the three factors. And there are also the risk profile. Yeah, the risk profile of the device is very, very important. So manufacturers should conduct a risk assessment when making a design change. If the risk assessment finds that the change would alter the safety and effectiveness of the device in either positive or negative way, then the change is considered to be significant. So few examples of that would be introducing a new hazard or hazardous situation, or it can be when it comes to design changes, it can be changed to the severity or the likelihood of the harm occurring, and also introduce any new required risk mitigation actions. On the other hand, to give an example of a non-significant change, the risk assessment conclusions are basically not altering the device change, the design change, and also the device performs the same as the original design submitted in the previous application. So you're basically using the same parameters in order to assess the risk assessment. So in this situation, it's likely considered to be non-significant. So the next type of change that the guidance document has stated is changes to sterilization. So any change that triggers a new or increased risk or production which produces any unexpected results from routine verification and validation is considered to be a significant change. So we have some examples of significant change pertaining to changes in sterilization. So one scenario, it can be whether the device material is more difficult to sterilize, or it basically affects the sterling residuals. So this can be a situation which can lead to a significant change. And another example would be if you're changing the sterilization method altogether, or if you're changing the dose delivery of the agent that you are using. And also another situation would be like if any critical cycle parameters are changed, that would also be considered to be a very high significant change. Um, the next type of change is the software changes. So we also have here few examples of the significant changes for software, such as in case if the change affects the function or performance specifications associated with the intended use of the device, or the intended use of a compatible device whose function is controlled by software. Another great example of software change would be, let's say the software changes are those that can create or necessitate a new risk control measure or a modification of an existing risk control measure for hazardous situation that could result in a significant harm, can also be considered as a significant change. Then we have some examples for non-significant changes, and those include so any changes that apply to those that are solely made to strengthen the cybersecurity or do not have any impact on the software or the device. If any of those changes, if they do not directly impact on the device, then they are considered as a non-significant change. And also incorporating a change to the operating system in which the software is running, where the underlying software code is not changed. So here are some examples that can help you determine whether your change in software is non-significant or significant. The next type of change we have here is change in materials for non-in vitro diagnostic devices. So a material change can basically, it may influence the device's manufacturing process. It can also impact the design specifications, the biological safety, biocompatibility, stability, and also it can impact your labeling and as well as the sterilization method. So a change in a material type or formulation, it can affect the chemical, physical, and as well as the electromagnetic properties of the material. The change is not significant if the altered material does not have any direct or indirect contact with the body or tissue fluid. And on the other hand, if the material is basically interacting with the body or body tissue fluid, then the material change is considered to be significant change. Here we have a flowchart that outlines the decision-making process for changes in materials for non-IVDD devices. But I know it's not very clear, but the flowchart is available in the guidance document, so you can always refer to the guidance document for more details. Uh, the next type of change is change in materials for in vitro diagnostic devices. So here are some examples that are considered likely to be significant changes. It can be any changes to the critical component of an in vitro diagnostic devices, for which a risk assessment also identifies that there is a potential impact on the safety and efficacy of the device. Another situation would be like any significant changes to the materials in an IVD that affects the operating principles of the device. So these are some scenarios where the changes could likely be considered as significant changes. Then we have changes to the labeling. The labeling change basically it includes user manuals, then we have the patient labeling, we have instructions for use, then also labels affixed on the devices itself, and also any other provided documents that include information about using the device. The labeling changes are often triggered by changing user requirements. It can also be changes to a device, including any change to their performance specifications or even materials. As I mentioned in my previous slides regarding the material change, it can have an impact on the labeling as well. And also consider each labeling change separately. It's important to consider every change in labeling separately. And here are some examples of the significant changes into labeling. It can be a limitation to the indications for use, or if it's used, and also if there are any changes to the wording that modifies or implies that more clinical evidence is required, and also some new claims associated with the earlier interventions. So you can go through these examples. I don't want to read out each and every change, but here are some important changes. And we also have some non-significant changes, such as any minor changes that clarifying the existing wordings on the warning and precautions of the device can be considered as a non-significant change. We also have the next category would be the class 3 and 4 devices. So the compatibility is the ability of a device when used with one or more other devices to achieve the overall clinical purpose without the use of having to modify or adapt any part of the combined devices. A medical device basically is intended to be used together with or medical devices must be compatible, and it should not have any adverse effects on the performance of the medical device which is used together and the devices that interacts with each other. So these are some changes to the diagnostic ultrasound systems. So Health Canada has recognized that there are a number of diagnostic ultrasound systems authorized in Canada, and that have some established safety portfolio. So you can go through the list. It's a pretty long list, so I don't want to go through each and every significant change. So lastly, we have the process and the procedure. So these are some forms that you should use in order to submit your amendment applications for class 3 and 4 devices. And also for minor change form, it's attached in the PPT itself. And for non-significant changes, it is important for the manufacturers to document the quality management system, uh, and also report the Health Canada at the annual renewal. So it is important to document your non-significant changes in your QMS. And so, as we have come to the end of our presentation, I would like to share the key takeaways. So, first thing is, it is important to understand the definition of significant changes and also refer to the examples provided in the guidance document. It can really help you in making those assessments. The second thing would be it is very much important to understand the general principles. I have put a lot of emphasis on understanding the general principles and the parameters that the agency is asking you to utilize in order to make your decisions. And the last would be it is important to consider these parameters such as risk assessment, the existing data sets, verification and validation testing in order to determine whether a change is significant or not. So that's all from my side today. I hope I was able to address the important aspects of the guidance document.
Thank you, Purva. We have a bunch of questions, but we've run out of time. We exceeded by 3 minutes. We will send this PowerPoint to everyone, and if you have questions, we will take the questions, but it says anonymous, so we don't know who asked those. If you'd like for us to address any questions, please email those and we'll do our best to do so. Once again, thank you so much for joining today, and we look forward to having you on our next webinar. And till then, have a great day.
Yep, thank you all.